Very good afternoon to you. We apologize for that. We had a bit of a technical hitch, but nevertheless, we're just going to start over from the top. And of course, our topic today is Francois Bozize'S role in the instability in Central African Republic. He is a former head of state came to power through a coup in 2003, served for 10 years and was removed from power in 2013. But before the coup that removed him, there had been some other subsequent coups that has happened. Then in Central African Republic, there has been 5 key coups, and the last one that removed Bozize was the last coup that happened in that country. And of course, Central African Republic was colonized by France, and it got its independence in 1960. And the first president was David Dacko, who was removed through a coup by Jean Bidel Bokassa, who served up until 1977. And he decided the title of the president was not good enough, so he decided he was going to be the emperor for Central African Republic, the emperor for life. So he did that, and it took him 2 years, and France was tired of that, and so they decided to organize for a coup that removed him from power, and they brought back David Dacko. David Dacko was removed from power through a coup, and André Kolingba is the one who removed him, and he became the president after that. And then Angers Felix Patasse came to power after an election was done. And there had been numerous coups that Bozize had tried to remove Patasse, but they were not successful. But the one he did in 2003 was successful, and so it removed him from power, and Bozize became the president from 2003. Was quite controversial, and a lot of how he was governing and his leadership style and the corruption that was ongoing and what was perceived to be inequality led to a formation of another rebel group in the name of Seleka that rebelled and marched to remove him from power in 2013. And after that, one of the coup leaders, Michel Jotodia, became the president of Central African Republic. Now, Central African Republic is predominantly a Christian country, and Muslims are around 95%. Now, this Michel Jotodia, who was from the Muslim community, the minority, became the president, and he was a leader in the Seleka militia group. So when he became the president, he really allowed the Seleka to continue with whatever it is that they had been doing in the country. But he did not get to serve for a very long time. He served for like a year, and during that year, I think he also suspended the constitution, and the regional body had a conversation with him because there was increased rebellion now, and because of how Seleka was became more powerful when President Jotodia was in power, another Christian militia group, Anti-Balaka, also formed to fight against the Seleka. And so because they're the majority, it became increasingly unstable and unsustainable. And so the regional bloc in the Central African community had talks with President Jotodia, and I think convinced him to step down. So he was in power for only just a year. And so he stepped down and resigned in 2014. And then there was an election that took place in 2015, and this election brought in the current president, Faustin Archange Touadéra, who won that election by 63% then. And of course, he has been in power. There's another election that happened in 2020, was a bit controversial, and President Touadéra also won that election with 53%. But we're looking at Bozize and his contribution to the instability in the Central African Republic. And currently, Bozize has gone into exile in Guinea-Bissau. President Umaro Sissoco Embalo confirmed that last week. Bozize, who is 76 years old, landed in the host capital Bissau on Thursday last week aboard a special flight from Chad, where he had been hiding since 2021. The former coup and rebel leader was received by President Embalo, who ushered him into a house paid for by the Bissau government. The Guinea-Bissau leader is the chairperson of the Economic Community of West African States, that is ECOWAS. Bozize ruled the Central African Republic, as I have explained there to you earlier, in 2003, and he was after he overthrew Felix Patasse in a coup, until he was also kicked out yet in another coup in 2013. And Central African Republic since then has known nothing but a crisis, and with Bozize now being suspected of being one of the main instigators of this conflict. Bozize rose to become a high-ranking army officer in the 1970s under the rule of Jean Badel Bokassa. After Bokassa was ousted, Bozize served in the government as Minister of Defense from 1979 to 1981 and as Minister of Information from 1981 to 1982. He participated in a failed coup in 1982 and against President André Koliba, and subsequently fled the country. Years later, he served as Army Chief of Staff under President Felix Patasse. He began a rebellion against Patasse in 2001. I've mentioned to you, he tried at least 3 coups before he was successful against President Patasse. And Bozize's forces captured the capital, Bangui, in March 2003, while Patasse was outside the country, and Bozize took power, ushering in a transitional period of government. He won the March and May 2005 presidential election in a second round of voting, and he was re-elected in January 2011 presidential election, winning the vote in the first round. In December 2012, the Central African Republic was plunged into an uprising by rebel forces who condemned the Bozize government for not honoring the peace agreement after the Central African Republic Bush War in 2007. Now, there was an agreement that was signed in but we'll get into that. I will get into that agreement. Now, this was the first agreement that was signed in 2005, and so with these rebel forces, and Bozize did not honor that agreement. So on March 24th, 2013, Bozize fled to Cameroon via the Democratic Republic of Congo after the rebel forces attacked Bangui and took control of the presidential palace. There, he was housed by President Paul Biya of Cameroon, and on the 29th of May 2013, an international arrest warrant was issued against Bozize by the Central Africa Justice, not the ICC, but the Central Africa Justice. And I think the United Nations only put some sanctions against him. The ICC refused to actually investigate and take up his matter to the court. Instead, they say they are monitoring the situation in Central African Republic, but the government then was needed or was asking for the ICC to take up this case and investigate Bozize's activity, but the ICC declined instead, but the United Nations sanctioned him. Now, on the 15th of March 2003, Bozize finally succeeded in seizing power. That is how he came to power, with his forces entering Bangui unopposed. Patasse was returning from a meeting in Niger at the time, just trying to explain how that could happen. But while he was on his way back, the President Patasse, he could not land, and because Bozize's forces were now controlling the airport, and Patasse took refuge in Cameroon and then Togo the next year. On March 23rd, Bozize appointed Abel Goumba as Prime Minister. In December, he made Goumba the Vice President and appointed Celestin Gombalet in his place as Prime Minister. Bozize also suspended the country's 1995 constitution after seizing power, and a new constitution, reportedly similar to the old one, was approved by voters in a referendum on the 5th of December 2004. After seizing power, Bozize initially said he would not run in a planned future presidential election, but after the successful constitutional referendum, he announced his intention to stand as a candidate on the 11th of December. In other words, Bozize had tasted power and he thought, you know what, it's not a bad idea. I might as well just run for the presidency of the country. So this is what is quoted as having said at that time. After thinking thoroughly and being deeply convinced and keeping in mind the nation's interest, I grasped the deep sense of my people's calls. As a citizen, I'll take up my responsibility. And if you see how Bozize has been moving, and even his triumphant return back from exile into Central African Republic in 2020, you can see his mindset clearly. It's still just the same way, very much so in the words that he spoke in 2004 when he said, you know, he's searched within himself and he feels his people need him, and he's doing this for the interests of the nation, right? That's what they all say. And he said, I'll contest the election to achieve the task of rebuilding the country, which is dear to me and according to your wish. And after that, after Bozize seized power, the Central African Bush War began with a rebellion by the Union of Democratic Forces for Unity, led by Michel Jotodia. I told you about that. This quickly escalated into major fighting that time. And then in 2004, one of 5 candidates approved to run in the presidential election scheduled for early 2005, and Bozize was one of these candidates. And on the 4th of January 2005, Bozize announced that 3 initial excluded candidates would also be allowed to run, although former President Patasei was not included in either group. So he was the one who was deciding who was going to run for the elections during that time. And in late January, it was announced that more candidates will be permitted to run in the election, bringing the total to 11 and leaving only Patasei barred. So I'm thinking a lot of these candidates are just planted by Bozize just to look as if it is the country is practicing multi-party democracy and all that. You could see how much, because it was under his prerogative that he allowed any other person to run, but you can see he was keen not to have the former president he had removed from power to run. But apparently 11 other parties were allowed to run, and Bozize placed first in the 13th March election, taking just under 43% of the vote according to the official results. He faced Patasei's last Prime Minister Martin Zinkwile in a second round of voting. This was held on the 8th of May, and according to official results and that were announced on the 24th of May, he won with 64.6% of the vote. He was sworn in on the 11th of June of that year. And the National Assembly authorized Bozize to rule by decree for 3 months. Bad idea. From January to 31st of March in 2006, his Prime Minister Eli Dote said that this period of rule by decree was very successful, enabling Bozize to take measures to streamline the civil service. In addition to being president, Bozize has been Minister of Defense, as I have explained there earlier. And in early 2006, Bozize's government appeared stable. However, Patasei, who was living in exile in Togo, could not be ruled out as a leader of a future uprising. His supporters reportedly were joining or were prepared to join rebellion movements in belief that the leader was still the rightful head of state of the country. Remember, Patasei only served for 1 year, and so he still felt he was robbed this opportunity. Never mind, he came to power through a coup as well. And father, member of the Kolibas Yakoma tribe in the south, posed a potential threat to Bozize's government because of the widespread boycott of the second round of the legislative elections. Members of the Yakoma dominate the army. That is, the members of a former president, they dominate the army. So that already was a problem. And on April 2007, a peace agreement between the government and the UFDR was signed in Birao. The agreement provided for an amnesty for the UFDR, its recognition as a political party, this was a rebel group, and the integration of its fighters into the army. And I think this is the same. When you look at this agreement, this peace agreement that was signed in 2007 between the government of Bozize and this rebel group, you would see it has all the hallmarks. When you look at the M23 and some of the things or some of the preconditions that they want, or what they're actually fighting for, basically, is for them to be allowed to be integrated in the army of the Democratic Republic of Congo, and also to be recognized in some way, shape, and form, and to be part of the government. And of course, President Bozize did not agree to that, and President Felix Tshisekedi is not even interested of having such kind of a conversation. So now you see. And further negotiations resulted in an agreement in 2008 for reconciliation, a unity government, and local elections in 2009, and parliamentary and presidential elections in 2010, and the new unity government that resulted was formed in January in 2009. Facing a general strike over wage arrears for civil servants in January 2008, Bozize appointed a new government headed by Faustin Archange Touadera. The current president served in Bozize's government as a prime minister, and he is an academic figure who was politically unknown. In that government, he kept the defense portfolio while also appointing his son, Francois Bozize, to work under him as minister delegate. So Bozize appointed his son. And then Bozize's sister, Yvonne Boisona, who had been Minister of Tourism, was reappointed to the government as Minister of Water, Forest, Hunting, Fishing, and the Environment. And then his nephew, Sylvain Dontingai, served as Minister of State, Mines, Energy, and Water Resources. So you can see nepotism. And it is things like this that made the Seleka say, enough is enough. We are coming after you, and we will run you out of town. Now, in February 2010, Kolingma died in France. In early March, Bozize presided over his burial ceremony in Bangui. The same week, Bozize signed a presidential decree setting a date for the next presidential election, which was to be held on the 25th April 2010. The elections were postponed to May 16th, and then indefinitely. The parliament was asked to pass a change to the constitution allowing the president to continue its mandate until elections could be organized indefinitely. Some sources saw the delay in elections as a constitutional coup and did not expect elections to take place anytime soon. However, elections were held in January and March 2011. Bozize and his party both won all these elections. Now, let's trace quickly the conflict, the genesis of this conflict, because I think it's important for us to understand the background, for us to really know perhaps where, through the leadership and how he came to power, where this current conflict might have emanated from. Now, since the new government came to power, fighting continued throughout the country with a law and order problem and other instances of violence, such as sexual violence. And there were also ethno-religious fighting between the Muslim and Christian communities, the Seleka and the Anti-Balaka. The Anti-Balaka were Christian, or is still, I think they're still there, Christian militia group, and the Selekas Muslim militia group. There has also there has been concerns of Islamists setting up base in the country, including Boko Haram, who are already present in neighboring Cameroon. And now, after President Jotodia came to power in 2013, who removed President Bozize, Michael Jotodia announced that Seleka had been dissolved, but most of the militias refused to disband. Remember? And he was the leader of Seleka. And that's why when we look at countries that are ridden with conflict, like Somalia and like South Sudan and like Democratic Republic of Congo, when I tell you I normally get anxious, or I suffer from anxiety when I hear that the government is using a militia to help it fight to help it, like in the case of Somalia, the government is using local militia in the fight against Al-Shabaab. In Democratic Republic of Congo, the government is using a militia and a rebel group, allegedly, to fight against M23 and other rebel groups. In South Sudan, the government, every different part of leaders, they all have their militias and they help in addressing these insecurity issues on a national level. And the problem is, once, say, Somalia is successful in its fight against the Al-Shabaab, militia group is a militia group, is a militia group, is a militia group. And at the end of the day, it will not be just helping the government in the hopes that, things will be fine and then they'll go back to their militant activities. There is a price that the government has to pay, and they will come up with demands at the end of it. And you might have thought that they've helped you solve a present security problem without you knowing that you are compounding a future bigger security problem by having these people being part of your security detail. Like in the case of now we see in Central African Republic, President Michel Djotodia was the head of the Seleka militia group. And after he came to power, now because he wanted to be presidential, he said, no, I think you guys are going too far and I want to disband this group. And maybe, I don't know if he had plans of having some of them serve in the army or whatever it is. But, the militia said, no, you cannot disband us. You used us to come to power, so we're here to stay. So they refused to be disbanded, and there were reports of widespread rape, killing, looting, and destruction of villages and administrative systems by these militias. And reported until mid-September 2013, when after that led to the coup, and after that, and nearly 400,000 people were displaced during that time, mostly to the bush, and around 68,000 had fled to neighboring countries. Torture, killings, and looting were suggested to have become widespread, and as chaos spread. And on the 4th of December 2013, the UN Security Council urgently voted in favor of the resolution that UN MISCA peacekeepers can use all force necessary to protect the lives of the civilians, after reports began emerging from the capital Bangui of widespread violence taking place. So hours after the vote, the then president of France, Francois Hollande, announced his country was committed to immediate action in order to stop the wave of killing, saying he has decided to act immediately, and that is when France decided to unilaterally send its forces to the Central African Republic. And in addition to the authorization of force, the Security Council resolution imposed an arms embargo on the country and asked the UN to prepare for a possible peacekeeping mission. Currently, the Popular Front for the Rebirth of Central Africa, FPRC, have taken over much part of the country. And I was just watching another documentary on this story, and according to reports, about close to 70% of parts of the Central African Republic is not under government's control. So it's under rebel groups that are about 14 in number, with the Popular Front for the Rebirth of Central African Republic being one of the key rebel groups in Central African Republic. Now we know that Bozize came back to the Central African Republic in 2020. He wanted to run again as the president, and he was barred by the Constitutional Court because of the UN sanctions against him. And also the Constitutional Court in the Central African Republic said that he did not meet the morality requirement. But when he came back, the Coalition of Patriots for Change, because remember the Seleka, the predominantly Muslim militia group, and the anti-Balakas, predominantly Christian militia groups. So a few of them from both sides came together to form the Coalition of Patriots for Change, and they appointed Bozize to be their running mate in the 2020 elections. And so he came back to a triumphant return to the Central African Republic, and I think his presence there was a bit worrying. And then the court ruled that he did not meet the morality requirement because of the cases and some of the things that have been that had been said about him, and the UN sanctions. So he did not meet the threshold to run as the president. And so after that, he took charge of a rebel alliance aiming to overthrow the central government, according to the coalition spokesperson. That is what they said. And so he could not. The country's current government accused him of being behind a recently failed offensive by the so-called Coalition of Patriots for Change against President Faustin Archange Touadéra, who won re-election in December 2020 vote that was marred by insecurity and low voter turnout. I'm told in that election, less than 1 million people showed up to vote, because parts of the country could not really vote. And as I've said, a huge part of that country is under rebel activity. So only a section of the Central African Republic came out to vote. And the coalition brought together 6 of the armed groups that control much of the country in 2020 to launch the offensive against Touadéra just more than a week before the December 27th presidential election and the legislative elections. And Bozize, who voiced support for the CPC the same year while urging a boycott of the elections, had denied allegations of heading the group. And on January 4th, the government launched an inquiry into him for rebellion. And he stayed in the country for a while. And Bozize initially had fled abroad after his removal and returned to Central African Republic in 2019 and denied these allegations. So he had gone to, I think it was in Chad for a while. And so last week now, the president of Guinea-Bissau said that he was offering him, he was going to have him, offer him a place to be. He would be under exile in Guinea-Bissau. And what the president said there I found to be quite interesting. So this is what President Mbalo said. I received the former president of Central African Republic, Francois Bozize, for humanitarian reasons and at the request of the Economic Community of Central African States. Chad is a member of the Economic Community of Central African States. So I think by him having been in Chad, perhaps was bringing some friction between Chad and Central African Republic. And so this community asked ECOWAS to have any of their member states to take in Francois Bozize, because it is alleged that while he was in Chad, he was still sponsoring some rebel activities against the government. And so he's still very much in charge of these rebel groups who came together to support him. They picked him to be their head and to run as the candidate during the 2020 elections. And himself, he has offered support for the CPC, that is the Coalition of Patriots for Change. So that is where the connection between the current instability and the current rebel activities and how they've been playing out in Central African Republic are linked to perhaps the support of former President Francois Bozize, who still feels he is the right person to lead Central African Republic currently. The instability continues, and because of so many of these coup attempts, the current president has decided, Touadéra, to have the Russian mercenaries come in the country and offer him security, and they are not even part. They've taken over his security detail as the president there in Central African Republic. And because of that, I was watching another documentary a few days ago, and these Russian mercenaries who are meant to come in and perhaps train the Central African Republic soldiers and to just train them. And I think there's some hospitals that apparently they're supporting in the interiors of the villages where mines are present. So when you see a truck coming, one of the whatever was watching, those sites are manned by the rebel groups, so they have to inspect these trucks and see what is it that they're bringing. So on this occasion, the Russian mercenaries, or this group from Russia, were saying they were going to take some medicine or some drugs to some interior health facilities. So when this rebel group was going through all these things, they find that outside of the medicine and other things that were required, they also were a cache of arms and all these things. So the Russians are bringing in arms there. Central African Republic is under arms embargo, so no any other country is supposed to have an arms trade with them, but they find other actors find a way of sneaking in these arms. And because these rebel groups are in charge of key mining sites, especially in the northeast of the country and the northwest of the country, and so you give them perhaps the arms, and they allow you to get could be the gold, could be the diamond, or whatever else that they have to offer. So that is how Russia really is benefiting right now, having been able to create some dissatisfaction between its former colony, France, former colony of Central African Republic, and the current regime. And so President Faustin Archange believes that these Russians are doing a great job in providing him with security and the country security. And he believes that maybe having these Russians there might protect him from any coup attempts by former President Francois Bozize'S, who has been known to have organized a successful coup before, and had also attempted several coups even before that, as I have explained there. So that is the connection of former President Francois Bozize and the current instability in Central African Republic. So I don't know, having moved him to Guinea-Bissau, if that will see the stability come back to Central African Republic, or what is going on, because he's being accused of supporting these key rebel fractions there in the Central African Republic. I want to thank you so much for your time this afternoon. This has been Diaspora Dispatches. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.